For those of you who have at some point purchased a tarot or oracle deck with a matte finish on the cardstock, you may have noticed that sometimes straight out of a new box, the cards stick to each other a bit and don't shuffle very well due to increased friction between the surface of each of the cards. This happens with rose petal finish cards as well. Whether a matte or rose finish petal deck of cards has a smooth gliding surface depends on the skill level of the operator of a machine at the printing factory who is applying a UV coating spray over the cards and anti-set-off spray that will give it both a matte look and feel, but also smooth out the surface just enough for there to be still good slip. And so when you do get a matte or rose finish deck straight out of the box that has some of that sticky issue or friction where some of the cards stick to each other, it doesn't shuffle too well, that's the reason for it. The amount of spray is a manual process and therefore it can be inconsistent. If the operator isn't experienced, then that's when you get a matte finish deck that has some stickiness where straight out of the box the cards are sticking to each other. Here's the thing, there is an at-home solution for this. In the printing industry, anti-set-off spray powder is used to create an air gap between printed sheets of paper, or in this case, cardstock. There are several different uses for anti-set-off spray powder, and in deck printing, one of those purposes is to keep two cards from sticking to each other, or two sheets of cards. The spray powder is typically made from natural plant starches. The formula is a small amount of calcium carbonate, or you can also use baking soda in a pinch, combined with a food-grade starch like cornstarch, wheat flour, semolina, tapioca starch, or finely milled rice powder. And it's a trade secret combination of what I just listed. The final pH level is going to be between 7 and 9, and that's what you want to go for. There could also be polymers and wax-like microfine particles to help increase the slippage. If you can't get calcium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate will work as well, just as a replacement in a pinch. It's a good alternative if you can't get calcium carbonate for your homemade anti-set-off spray. By the way, you can actually make a version of calcium carbonate at home by yourself by using dried eggshells, and you crush the dried eggshells into a superfine powder, calcium carbonate. The refined grain powder made of starches and some calcium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate is used to provide good sheet separation. This fine grain powder made of starches and some calcium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate in a pinch is used for creating good sheet separation, and anti-set-off spray is typically considered integral and necessary as part of the printing process. But it can be labor intensive even at an industrial factory level. And so this is one of those steps in production where corners can often get cut. All you need to do to rectify that issue if corners got cut in the production process of the deck that you're holding in your hands is to apply that anti-set-off spray powder onto your matte or rose petal finish cards yourself. Some industrial versions of this is banned in the European Union because of some of those additives that can be part of the trade secret formula. The product is typically sold to factories because it's part of what they need for their machinery and not typically marketed to the individual consumer like you or I. I think it's you or me. So it can be hard to come by, or if you do see it, you have to buy like an insanely large quantity of it that you would never realistically finish in one lifetime. And also, I don't even know if it's worth spending your money to buy because you can make it at home yourself. I've been doing a little bit of research and a lot of experimentation, and I would like to share with you my findings. For a deck of 78 to 80 cards, you'll want a 1/4 teaspoon of cornstarch, or the finest starchy powder you have in your kitchen or can get your hands on, plus a pinch of baking soda. The thing with making your own calcium carbonate out of eggshells is that you really need to know what you're doing because it has to be super, super fine. One way to test whether or not it's fine enough in grain size is after you have mashed it in your mortar and pestle is to just take a little pinch of it and rub it between your fingertips. It should completely disappear between your fingertips. If it does not completely disappear between your fingertips, you didn't do a good enough job, I'm sorry to say. So yes, that's one of the ways to test out whether or not you've got a fine grain enough calcium carbonate by making it home with eggshells. It has to be so fine that it disappears between your fingertips. And in my experimentation to try to get something easy to use, easy to make, but will also be highly effective, I did find personally that you can leave out that calcium carbonate and it shouldn't be too much. It doesn't really have that big of a detrimental impact if you leave out the homemade calcium carbonate. So if you can't get it to that super fine level, I would say don't do it. If you can't get it to that level, don't do it. The baking soda is a chemical leavener, so it lightens and it aerates. It's how you create teeny tiny pockets of air between the cards, which is why your cards will then shuffle a lot better. The baking soda is also added to this mixture to help moderate the pH level of the powder. Funny enough, from an alchemical and chemistry perspective, sodium bicarbonate separates and removes impurities. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it purifies. And for the particular audience watching this video right now, I don't need to tell you about the magical properties of crushed eggshells. Don't you love it when science and magic converge? This homemade powder replicates what anti-set-off spray would do. All you need is a 1/4 teaspoon or 1.25 milliliters of the finest grain flour or starch you can get your hands on. Here I'm using tapioca flour. It was just the finest I had on hand in my kitchen. I found that cornstarch works very well. And so you have just about a 1/4 teaspoon of it. I also took a pinch of baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. What you do is you take 3 fingers, grab it into the baking soda, so just a pinch, and you add a pinch of baking soda to the 1/4 teaspoon or 1.25 milliliters of the starch or flour. Then what I begin with is to separate out the cards as well as you can kind of begin to, let me just see if I can get this on. So you just do this because you're going to want to try to, as evenly as possible, coat the surface of the cards. And it's going to take a little bit of work to replicate spraying of the powder, since we can't do that without an aerosol can spray. So we're just going to just sprinkle and flour. It'll work, not as well as the industrial version, but I mean, the cost benefit analysis, it works pretty darn good if you ask me. So I'm now going to take the 1/4 teaspoon of my sodium bicarbonate and starch mixture and just very lightly, as lightly as possible, sprinkle it on. It's not going to be too even, but don't worry, we're going to be shuffling it and mixing it around, so it should be okay once we get the mixing going. But I'm just going to show you how it's just layer by layer, and be patient. You know, don't be too aggressive. Okay, that's all my cards now. So now I'm going to just try to sprinkle the rest of this powder. Now I'm just going to try to very gently shuffle the powder into the cards and try to conceptualize rubbing in lotion. So you're rubbing gently lotion into the surface of your cards. And if you conceptualize it that way, you'll replicate the right process. You are going to want to riffle shuffle after you've powdered it, because it's just for me, I found this to be the best way to really distribute it. This is going to be very awkward because, as you can kind of see, I'm at a bad angle. Now, since I'm riffle shuffling, I like to, so you see how I did it one way first, and I switch it to do it the opposite. That way the cards stay straight. If you always riffle shuffle the same exact way, you end up with the cards that kind of arch a little bit. I personally don't love that, so I always riffle shuffle evenly to keep them flat. And now, whenever you feel that it's still powdery on the surface, very gently rub it in, like you're rubbing in lotion, because you want to get the fine-grained starch into the pores of your cardstock. You just put it down and smooth it out gently. Set it down, smooth it in, and set it down. Gently smooth it in. Set it down on your flouring board. Gently smooth it in. Set it down. Cornstarch really works the best. I liked cornstarch over all-purpose white flour. And again, you don't need to use too much. A little bit goes a long way. I only used a 1/4 teaspoon of the fine-grained starch for this project. Even though the starch is white, it doesn't impact in any detrimental way the ink at all, and that is why industrial printers use this. They do use that plant-based starch powder, the anti-set-off spray, in their printing process, and it aerates between the layers of cardstock or paper, and that way it leaves that little tiny micro layer of air, and so when you shuffle it'll be a lot easier, and it also helps with smoothness. Just be gentle and take your time. Approach this as a meditation experience. So you do want to stay calm and grounded and centered. Sit up straight, keep your feet on the ground, and just feel very relaxed as you do this, and be patient with yourself. Be patient with the cards. Don't rush the process. Just approach this as a form of meditation. And it really is a form of meditation. Gather up all the cards, and I like to take my time because as you gather the cards, you want to be feeling for residual powder so that you can gently massage it into the pores of the cardstock. So as you gather it up, just use this opportunity as you gather to kind of just feel the surface wherever you can, and if you still feel a little bit of powder, gently massage and rub it into the pores of the cardstock. And even where you still see residuals of the white starch on yourself, gently transfer it to the cards. And when this process is done, there should be no white residuals left, or very, very minimal starchy powder left. You will have gently massaged it into the surface of all the cards. So that's one way to make sure that you've done it, quote unquote, correctly, is to just see whether or not there's any residuals. Because it's a fine grained powder, you're still going to see just a slight film of it left on the surface of your hand, which can be easily washed off, no issue. It's like making cookies, but there's going to be a very slight bit left, but not much at all. So as you can see already, a lot of that really cakey whiteness of the flour or the starch is already gone. So continue doing this, rubbing it gently into your cards. And once again, what we're doing here is a homemade do-it-yourself version of a standard process in the printing industry. They spray anti-set-off powder onto the cards between each sheet to maintain the smoothness. It's almost like a waxy form of coating. That is why you can have a matte finish, and you can still have a lot of smoothness and glide between the two sheets. They won't stick to each other, and it reduces that initial natural friction when you've sprayed on a matte UV coating. When you still see the starch powder on the gilding or the edges of your cardstock, fan it out just slightly so there's a little bit of looseness between the cards, and just gently massage it in until it completely disappears. But you do want to kind of separate it out just a little bit, and then kind of gently rub it in so it's getting into that edging right here. You can do that on all sides. And what's so interesting is the industrial strength anti-set-off spray powder that printers and printing companies use is made out of a plant-based starch with a sodium bicarbonate, a very slight amount of sodium bicarbonate combined with a combination of plant-based starches such as cornstarch, wheat flour starch. There's also rice flour that they could potentially use, tapioca flour, and so on. It's just a proprietary trade secret mixture or formula that each brand would, I assume, have. And we're replicating that at home, just using what you have in your kitchen. If you had used the 1/4 teaspoon, the 1.25 milliliters of powder, then you really shouldn't have too much residual left on your board. Whatever little bit you have, I just kind of like to rub it up and gently massage it into the surface of the cards, little by little. Oh, it's already shuffling so much better. Oh my gosh, look at this. It is. Oh, look at that. It is already shuffling. So, do you see that? I don't know if yeah, you can see. Oh, that's so, it's already so much better. Look at that. And I'm not even done yet. This is also a really fantastic way to socialize with your brand new deck and bond with it. Now, for those of you who don't read with reversals, what you would want to do now is to just begin to rectify all the cards. Just go through your deck again as patiently as you can muster, calm and centered, and just turn upright any card that was upside down from the process. And while you do this, again, just be sensitive and observant. Where you still feel a little bit of that residual powder, you want to just really rub it. The powder did not have any detrimental impact to the color saturation, the color values in ink. So no impact at all. It's perfect. Just continue doing this. And as you go through your deck, just be observant, and again, check for any residual powder that hasn't really made its way into the pores of the surface yet. And just give it a nice massage to really get it in. The great thing about this process is you only really need to do it once. You get that brand new deck straight out of the shrink wrap, and you see that because it is either a matte finish or a rose petal finish, something must have happened during the that anti-set-off spray powder at the factory, and because it wasn't put to the right settings, all you have to do is replicate the process and rectify that inconsistent spray that happened at the factory, and you can do it yourself. And because it's manually done, it can really be artisanal. You can really perfect the process and have a lot of attention to detail, which wouldn't happen on the factory floor because you're doing it to one deck, your deck. That attention to detail and tender loving care is there. In case it's not a given, you do want to remove all jewelry. You do want to do this with your bare hands. The tactile experience, I think both physically in terms of application and also spiritually, it's much better to just use your bare hands. Look at the richness of the colors. Isn't that beautiful? Just no impact whatsoever on the color values. And now all of your cards are upright for those who do not read with reversals. Once again, any residuals of the starch you see on the edging, just try to get a little bit of space in between the cards, and then you just gently rub it into the edging until it completely disappears. You can do the separation process as many times as you like. Whatever feels right to you. This is when I would absolutely lean into your physical your observations. So observe physically what's happening and make assessments based on that, and also intuitively establish that rapport with your deck and get a sense of when it feels like everything's good to go. Once you're done, try to loosely, again, just try to get a little bit of fine gaps between each card like this. Tap out any residual fallout of the powder there is. So over your cutting board, just gently tap out any residual fallout. Depending on how thoroughly you were able to tap out the residuals, and even see, I didn't even do that great of a job. You still see a little bit that I have left behind. The first few times of using the deck right after you've done this process, you are going to continue having a little bit of fallout, but all you need to do is be careful where you're handling the cards those first few times so you're not making a mess in your home living space. This problem completely goes away and there's really no more fallout whatsoever. And not only is there no more fallout, but after 3 or 4 real handling and using of the cards, that tender loving care you would give to a tarot deck, all of it gets applied evenly into the cards and you no longer have that friction issue where it's difficult to slide and difficult to pick out. If you had issues before with separation of the cards, now that separation issue is gone. This friction issue with the matte cardstock, the slight reduction in surface smoothness, is something fairly standard that you find in a lot of indie and mass market decks today that are matte or rose petal finish. I experimented with many different formulas and then decided, okay, let's try to find one that is simple, easy, as accessible as possible so you don't have to do a lot of crazy stuff or buy a lot of crazy ingredients. So what is the simplest and yet highly effective formula for this? And this is what I came up with after lots and lots of trials. Also, truly, especially with the SKT, with frequent handling and socializing of your deck of cards, the pliability absolutely increases and the initial friction issue completely goes away.